Welcome to HOA Disasters, the channel where we expose the outrageous, the absurd, and the downright unbelievable stories from neighborhood hell. I'm Chico, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA that went too far, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because trust me, these stories only get crazier. Now let's get started. A thin layer of morning fog curled around the cracked sidewalks of Cypress Ridge, turning everything a ghostly, uncertain gray. The sun hung low, struggling to break through. Street by street, the uniform rows of beige homes carried the same predictable shutters and stiffly trimmed lawns. Proof that the Homeowners Association ran this neighborhood with a precise, even stifling kind of order. On most days, Alan Fierce barely noticed the sameness. He kept to his own routine. Coffee toast, check the inbox, water his little side garden. But this morning, after an uncertain night's sleep, something jabbed at his nerves. He saw the envelope tucked into his mailbox as soon as he turned the corner. Its bone white color was its own warning, official, unwavering, bold red, HOA stamp over the front. He pressed the envelope between shaking fingers as he shuffled back up the driveway. The crickets were silent, and his neighbors' houses looked farther away than usual. Alan's heart thumped against his ribs as he ran his thumb along the sticky flap. It wasn't the first letter he'd received. He'd been through the strings of notices over the years. The ones about his blue hydrangeas being non-regulation, about his flag being half an inch too high, the time he left his trash cans out for 3 hours past pickup. Each one as inflexible as the last. But today's letter was different. The warning came with a fine. $300. Violation, unapproved ramp installation. Alan's knees locked. He read again, the muscle in his jaw tensing. They wanted him to remove the metal ramp at his front steps, which he'd installed only after a nasty accident left him spending more time than he liked in a wheelchair. The words practically sneered up at him. The installation of ramps is prohibited, except by explicit HOA waiver. Please submit removal proof within 10 days. His fists balled as the implications sunk in. It was more than just a fine. Without the ramp, he'd have to struggle up the steps again. Impossible, really, unless he wanted to crawl. Did the board not even care? He replayed the past months. Miss Lydia, his elderly neighbor who always brought over tomatoes, mentioning quietly how her own light fixture had earned her a letter. The new family, who received a rude welcome. The board running unopposed, voting through policies with only a nod. Alan sat on his porch as dull sunlight finally began to fill the street. Neighbors bustled in and out, a blur of car doors, sleepy waves, but no one stopped to chat. He stared at the letter. It felt heavy, ruthless, not just paper and regulations, but a threat. Delivered in perfect legal wording. Still clutching the notice, Alan's eyes lingered on the handwritten addition at the bottom. Please comply promptly. Non-compliance will result in escalating penalties and attorney fees, no exceptions. He sensed something else roaming behind the lines. Something personal. Was it just bureaucracy? Did someone on the board hold a grudge? Or were they simply heartless enough not to care that someone needed that ramp to get by? For a second, he considered just paying the fine. It would be easier. But then, with a sudden, hot spike of anger, he shook his head. Why should he? He'd researched and followed every city code regarding accessibility. This was his home. The ramp wasn't some cosmetic whim. And something told him there was more to this story. More fines, more power plays. More to uncover. Alan slid the letter onto his lap, wondering who exactly wrote the policy, who sat at the top of the HOA and enforced it so blindly. They'd made it so easy to feel outnumbered. Yet, in the fuzzy morning light, Alan knew this was a fight he couldn't ignore. He tilted his head, staring at the no exceptions line. There was always an exception, wasn't there? He just had to find it. Inside, the kettle began to whistle. Shrill and demanding, but he stayed seated. Something told him, this morning, everything was about to shift. And just as Alan resolved to dig deeper, a movement across the street caught his eye. a sleek silver Prius pausing by his neighbor's walkway. Someone inside was watching. Deliberate, careful. It seemed like this letter was only the beginning. Before the kettle even finished its shrill scream, Alan had more questions than answers. How far was this HOA willing to go? And who, exactly, was behind that steering wheel, pausing just a little too long outside his house? Alan's coffee cooled on the table, untouched. The living room felt different this morning, more claustrophobic, as if the very walls were listening. He stared at the ramp through the window. Utilitarian, yes, but cleanly installed. Right to code. His hands fidgeted restlessly on the arms of his chair. He pulled up his laptop. Cypress Ridge HOA website with its dated beige font loaded slow as honey. He poked through the rules and regulations archive, the minutes, the contact directory. The ramp policy wasn't even listed in the last issue of the CCRs. But, like some sort of ghost amendment, there it was. Architectural modifications. No ramps or external fixtures permitted on front facades without separate waiver, at sole board discretion. Discretion. Alan's jaw tightened again. They had given themselves loopholes and unchecked power to deny. He wondered who actually sat behind these decisions as he blinked bleary-eyed through PDFs and bylaws. Light footsteps creaked outside. He flicked his gaze to the window. Miss Lydia, with her hunched frame and basket of tomatoes, shuffled up his path. She stopped short, clearly not expecting the silver Prius still idling opposite the curb. The driver, a woman Alan recognized from last year's HOA barbecue. Sandra Reed, the board secretary, pretended to check her mirror but didn't glance away. Alan's skin prickled a little. It wasn't paranoia if people were watching. He opened the door, smiling gently at Lydia. She handed him the tomatoes, eyes darting to the Prius. "Strange car," she whispered, voice barely above the wind. Then, more quietly, "They sent me another letter, Alan, about my mailbox paint. Third one this month." Her words pulsed with embarrassment, but Alan heard something else. Fear. She clutched at her cardigan, the way you do when you're cold inside. "Are you all right?" she ventured. Alan shook his head, showing her the letter. She frowned, lips tightening. "For your ramp? But hasn't it helped?" Sandra's car engine roared suddenly to life. Alan watched it slide away, guilt lingering in its wake. Lydia's gaze followed, shaky. "I heard the new family got fined too," Lydia said, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "Their son's swing set. Not pre-approved. These rules change when they want." Alan pressed his tongue to his teeth, thinking. There were more stories here. More people, isolated and silent, each with their own pile of warning letters. Why should the board wield this kind of power? Outside, an orange tabby darted between the hydrangeas, reminding Alan of how he used to joke the HOA might fine him for improper wildlife. Suddenly, it didn't seem far-fetched. He thanked Lydia and promised to check in later. As the door closed, a new heaviness slipped into the house beside him. More browser tabs opened. He searched for ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, provisions. Surely there had to be protections, a way out. Line after line scrolled past. Reasonable accommodations. Prohibited discrimination on the basis of disability. One tab led to a forum. A user named HOA_nightmare described an eerily similar situation in another town. Refusal to grant accommodations. Fines stacking up. The thread was filled with links to lawsuits, settlements, angry local news segments. A small thrill sparked deep inside Alan. He wasn't the only one. He grabbed a notebook and started jotting names. EDA, HDS, Fair Housing Act. He'd build his arsenal, brick by determined brick. His phone buzzed. An email from Cypress Ridge Board. Another warning. 10 days and counting. Immediate action required. Alan didn't flinch. He flipped to a fresh page and underlined something he'd scribbled earlier. They want to play by their own rules. Let's see what happens when the rules change. A knock sounded at his door, this time faster, insistent. Not Lydia's gentle tapping, but sharp, almost angry. Alan's heart skipped. He wheeled to the entrance, mind racing. Who would it be? The board? A new threat? Or maybe an ally, finally, willing to stand up with him? He gripped the door handle tightly, aware suddenly of how alone he really was. Or maybe not as alone as he thought. And as he pulled the door open, his next move might just change everything. The door swung wide, hinges creaking under Alan's tense grip. Standing there was Tom McMillan, Cypress Ridge's newly moved-in neighbor. Tom hesitated, scanning Alan's wary expression, then forced a tight smile. His young daughter, Lucy, clung to his khaki shorts, half hiding behind his leg. Tom's hand hovered, uncertain between a wave and a handshake. Alan softened, memories flickering of his own daughter's first day in these same streets, years before the neighborhood had calcified into rules and warnings. "Sorry to bother you," Tom started, his voice thin and tired. I got your number from Lydia." "You don't know us, but—" He trailed off, searching Alan's face for a sign, invitation or rejection. Alan motioned them in gently. Lucy peered shyly, then tiptoed after her father. The little girl had a faded band-aid on one knee, her shoelace trailing like an afterthought. She gripped a ragged bunny toy, a haphazard beloved talisman. As Tom sank onto the couch, Lucy roamed the bookshelf, lifting dust motes with each movement. Alan offered water, the silence heavy as glass, then broke it. "You got a letter too." Tom slumped lower, crumpling the notice in his palm. "Third one in 6 weeks," he muttered. "First the swing set, then the mailbox, now the fence. They want us to take it down, but my wife put it up while I was in the hospital. She's furious." Alan nodded, anger doubling back. It wasn't just him, not just seniors or people with disabilities. "Do you know why?" he asked. Tom shook his head. "We asked. Their answer was just the rule book. Nothing about safety, nothing about helping families. They just want control." His eyes flickered toward Lucy. "We're not troublemakers. We just wanted to stay out of sight." Alan's resolve deepened. If even new families, cautious, quiet, could be targeted, no one was actually safe here. They sat, steam curling from Alan's forgotten coffee. Tom's voice dulled to a whisper. "I heard you put in a ramp. They said they'd make you remove it." Alan grinned wryly, holding up the letter. For a second, the ridiculousness of it almost made him laugh. "Did you ever talk to the board in person?" Alan asked. Tom's face darkened. "Tried. Got stonewalled at the last meeting. They barely let us finish before calling security." Lucy's bunny thudded to the ground. She looked up with big, uncertain eyes. Alan bent down, picking it up and brushing off a bit of lint. "Nice bunny," he said quietly. Lucy managed a shy smile. Tom ran a hand through his hair. "If there's any way we could fight this, I'd help. My wife's had it with them, but she's tired. We moved for peace, you know?" Peace. The word hung there, unwelcome, echoing down the silent hallway of Alan's mind. He looked at the ramp outside, the hydrangeas, the letters. Each one a mark against the very idea of peace in Cypress Ridge. He finally said, almost to himself, "They want us tired, isolated. If we push back..." Tom sat up a little straighter, hope barely flickering alive. "You think we can?" Alan didn't answer. Instead, he gestured at his open laptop. "I've been gathering info. HOA fair housing. These rules, they might not be legal, especially not when they target people who need reasonable accommodations to live with dignity." The very idea sent a bolt of energy through Alan. Tom's eyes widened. "If there's a way, if you need signatures, help with anything." Lucy giggled as her bunny danced, her presence a soft, human counterpoint to the cold legality swirling around them. For a moment, hope seemed possible. A soft ping sounded from the laptop. A new email. Reminder, board meeting tonight. Alan looked at Tom. "You free tonight?" Tom's nod came quickly, nearly urgent. Alan grinned. Then let's see how they like being put on the spot. But, even as the plan formed, Alan's stomach tightened. Confrontation was never without cost, especially in a place like Cypress Ridge. As Tom and Lucy headed for the door, Alan heard Lucy ask softly, "Daddy, are we in trouble?" He watched them walk away, two uncertain silhouettes against the overcast afternoon, and wondered just how much trouble they were really walking toward. He closed his door quietly behind them, 100 questions swirling. Was this really the start of something? Or were they just setting themselves up for a bigger fall? When the sun surrendered to twilight, Cypress Ridge transformed from suburban order to something tense, something waiting. Alan watched the streetlights flicker on, their glow lost in a hazy layer of dusk. He checked the time. 30 minutes until the board meeting, but his mind raced ahead. What would they say? What would he say? And would anyone actually listen? He pulled on a pressed button down and shined his badge from a local service committee. Alan wasn't one for confrontation, but tonight he wanted, for once, to show his neighbors who he was. Tom texted, "We're here, staying by the entrance." Alan responded only with a thumbs up. He knew courage didn't always roll. Sometimes it just showed up. The meeting took place in the community center, a squat beige building that smelt permanently of industrial cleaner and half-forgotten bake sales. Alan steeled himself as he pushed through the double doors. Inside, the fluorescent lighting hummed. The boards sat in a row at the front. 3 men and 1 woman, Sandra, the board secretary from the silver Prius. She wore the same pressed suit, not a hair out of place. Her gaze picked Alan out instantly. A dozen residents filled folding chairs, most clutching manila envelopes of their own. Alan caught fragments of whispered complaint as he passed. A dog's bark, holiday decorations, grass half an inch too tall. Beneath it all was a hum of anxious resignation. The board president, Mr. Carmichael, pounded his gavel and began. "Order. Before we proceed, any residents wishing to address the board?" Alan raised his hand. The silence thickened. Even Tom looked nervous, shifting beside a pale-faced woman. His wife, no doubt, knuckles white around her purse. Carmichael barely nodded. "You have 2 minutes." Alan steadied himself. "My name is Alan Pierce. I use a wheelchair." Here he paused, letting his presence speak. "And the board has demanded I remove my ramp. I'd like to know why, and if the board is aware of ADA law or reasonable accommodation requirements." A half snort, half mutter slipped from a board member. Carmichael adjusted his glasses. "The bylaws prohibit unsanctioned alterations." "Waivers exist, but—" Sandra interjected. "Waivers are considered upon written request. The ramp is an eyesore, and property values—" Alan cut in. "Property values are not more important than residents' rights. The ADA is federal law. Do you know it's illegal to deny reasonable modifications for people with disabilities?" Someone in the back murmured agreement. Alan pressed on. "Can you point me to when you last updated the bylaws? Or when reasonable accommodations were last considered?" Silence. Alan's heart thundered. Something was shifting. The residents seemed to lean forward, hungry for answers. Alan risked a glance at Tom, who nodded, face tight with support. Mr. Carmichael's lips thinned. "This is not the forum for legal debate. Submit your requests through proper procedure. Meeting adjourned." He slammed the gavel. The room exploded in low, angry chatter. Sandra's eyes found Alan, sharp and cold as glass. Tom joined him as people shuffled out. "Did you see their faces?" he whispered. "They're scared. But they won't say it." Lydia hovered nearby, voice trembling. "They're counting on us giving up, Alan." Alan nodded, a slow certainty coiling inside. The board was rattled, but desperate people, backed into a corner, could be unpredictable. As the hallway cleared, Alan lingered a moment longer. He heard Mr. Carmichael hiss to Sandra, "Get legal started. Shut him down fast." In the parking lot, Alan could almost feel those words chasing him home. Would the board double down, or finally crack? He loaded into his car, glancing back at the brightly lit windows burning behind him. Voices echoed in the dark. The promise of danger, or the first crack in the wall. As he started the engine, his phone pinged. A new email subject line flashed. Official notice of violation. Escalation. Alan's skin prickled with dread as he read the opening lines. It seemed the board wasn't willing to back down. Not at all. Night fell heavy and restless over Cypress Ridge. Alan found himself at the kitchen counter, brow furrowed. The HOA's escalating notice open on his phone. The words blurred, but the message was sharp. Failure to comply will result in daily fines, attorney fees, and possible lien on property. He felt every threat in his bones. Even with his new resolve, the pressure was tangible, the risk of losing his home, his only independence. He emailed his brother, a paralegal, forwarding the language and asking for thoughts. "Looks like intimidation," came the reply minutes later. "They can't supersede federal law. Document everything. Don't respond alone." Alan documented it all. Emails, notes, even the board meeting aftermath. He had heard enough horror stories online to know that paper trails mattered. That night, he couldn't sleep. As hours passed, he watched headlights crawl past his house, never sure if it was security, a neighbor, or someone recording evidence for the board. He scribbled notes in his journal, fighting fear with facts. Morning brought a rare moment of sunshine, pooling gold across his desk. Tom texted, "You okay?" Alan replied, "Still here." He called the HUD Fair Housing hotline. A calm voice walked him through documentation, confirming again that the HOA might be overstepping. "You should formally request an accommodation in writing," she advised. "Then, if they deny, file a federal complaint. We'll help you." Alan started drafting a letter. He explained his disability, the medical necessity of the ramp, how local and federal law required reasonable accommodations. The act of writing felt powerful, an assertion not just of his rights, but of his existence. He CC'd Tom on the draft. Tom read it aloud to his wife, who immediately offered to co-sign a petition with other families. Emboldened, Alan sent the letter by certified mail and email, copying every board member. For the first time since this began, he felt a little less powerless. Each keystroke became a small claim on his own life. Late in the afternoon, Lydia knocked at Alan's door. She carried store-bought cookies. "No tomatoes this time. They fined me for watering on the wrong day." Her eyes welled with tears. "They called my son," she whispered. "Told him I might lose my home if I don't comply." Alan felt her fear and rage. "You're not alone," he assured her. Lydia squeezed his hand. Something had changed. The board's strategy wasn't just paperwork. It was pure pressure, applied until people broke. The phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Alan answered, nerves wound tight. "Mr. Pierce, this is Mark Withers. I'm the association's legal counsel. Regarding your recent correspondence, let's discuss resolution." His voice was smooth, rehearsed, almost kind. But Alan sensed what lay just under that surface. Threat masked as negotiation. They set a call for the next morning. Alan sat back, unsure whether he was at the start of something hopeful or about to walk into a legal trap. He stared at his notes, knowing he needed the perfect words, the right allies, and a city ready to hear the truth. Otherwise, Cypress Ridge's power plays would keep on grinding, letter after letter, fine after fine. But, as tired as he was, Alan wasn't ready to surrender. If anything, the board's new cruelty just sharpened his determination. Still, when midnight came, he left the porch light on, partly for hopeful neighbors, partly for safety. But mostly just in case. Tonight was the night everything changed. And as dawn crept in, a new idea struck Alan with unexpected urgency. A weapon the board hadn't counted on at all. The phone rang at precisely 10 a.m., right on schedule. Alan's hands shook, sweat prickling along his palms as he clicked, "Answer." Mark Withers' voice came through crisp and formal, the words practiced and almost friendly. "Mr. Pierce, Thank you for making time. I've reviewed your correspondence and want to find a solution that works for all parties. Alan steadied his breathing and repeated the key points. HOA protection, HUD guidance, medical necessity. He insisted this was no negotiation, but a legal requirement. Withers listened, then cleared his throat. We understand your position, but our hands are tied by the association's CCNRs. However, the board is willing to consider your waiver application, should you agree to certain modifications. Alan's jaw shot up. What modifications? Withers sidestepped. Minimize visual impact. Materials, color, possible additional screening. Our community has standards. Alan's patience wore thin. If you're suggesting I hide my own access because of someone's sensibilities, that's not going to fly. Fines need to stop. And threatening my neighbors ends now. A long pause followed, a silence heavy with calculation. Withers finally said, We'll relay your feedback to the board. They ended the call. Alan felt the pressure in his chest shift. Not a release, but a new kind of energy, restless and ready. He drafted a summary email and sent it to Tom, Lydia, and another neighbor, Carla, who'd quietly reached out that morning about new fines for a basketball hoop. Alan's phone buzzed. A new notification. A message from a local journalist. Saw your post on the Disabled Rights Forum. Interested in talking? Story sounds important. His pulse jumped. Exposure, sunlight on the boardroom shadows. Alan and Tom hopped on a call with a reporter, a sharp-voiced woman named Mercy Grady. She asked for background, stories, even documentation. These associations run roughshod over people until someone fights back, she said. I want names, faces, evidence. Alan glanced at his ramp, a wry smile touching his lips. You'll have all that. We're tired of being quiet. Hours later, Mercy texted a follow-up. Any idea if other homeowners face denial of accessibility requests? Alan hadn't, but now the question sparked a fire. He typed out messages to the neighborhood group, careful and non-confrontational. Has anyone else had trouble receiving accommodations? Anonymous is okay. Responses trickled in. 2 more people, both older residents, described being harassed for railing and handrail installations. A young mother mentioned her son's therapy swing, denied outright as an eyesore. Alan shared the info with Mercy, who promised, This could be a big one. Stay safe. Knight brought another email from the board. Pending legal review, all fines are tabled. Waiver decisions to be reviewed by committee. A stall tactic, or the first sign the board was feeling the heat. Alan knew the board wouldn't cave easily. Power taken for granted, once challenged, often fights back twice as hard. Still, as he drifted towards sleep, Alan couldn't help but wonder. If the story went public, would the community rally? Or would the board dig in? Consequences be damned. Siren wailed in the distance. Alan jolted upright, adrenaline surging, heart racing at what the next day might bring. The next morning, the air in Cypress Ridge felt charged, brighter, restless. News traveled fast here, even when people pretended not to care. Alan's phone buzzed with messages, some offering cautious support, a few nervous and anonymous. A couple of responses were openly hostile. Keep our dirty laundry in-house, one read. You're just causing trouble, another warned. Alan massaged his temple, feeling the weight of both praise and blame. Noon, a flyer appeared in every mailbox. Special HOA meeting, emergency session, attendance required. The agenda was thin, but the subtext was clear. The board was trying to seize back control, make an example. Rumors started to percolate about unrest and dangerous precedents. Tom called, anxious, whispering, Do you think they'll try to force a vote about the ramp? Try to push you out? Alan shrugged, but inside, raw nerves burned. If they do, at least it'll be public. He spent the afternoon combing his files one more time. Printouts of ADA rulings, photos of ramps from other neighborhoods, evidence that Cypress Ridge was out of step. Each page stacked up, a paper fortress against the coming storm. Evening arrived, golden and soft, but the walk to the community center was tense. Little knots of neighbors clustered on driveways, hesitant eyes following Alan as he rolled by. No one greeted him, not like before. He recognized the shape of fear, the kind stirred up to keep people silent. Inside, the mood was thick, defensive. The board wore matching scowls. Sandra's gaze was especially cold, fingers drumming against her notepad. Lydia and Tom sat close, a fragile island in a sea of neutrality. Mr. Carmichael opened the session, voice slick with legalese. Recent events have caused disruption in our community. The board must address actions that seek to undermine established order. Alan wheeled forward, refusing to be cowed. Are you referring to residents asserting their civil rights under federal law? A few people snorted. Nervous laughter or irritated retort? It was hard to say. Carmichael barked, "We have rules for a reason." "Not if those rules break the law," Alan cut in. Murmurs built, like static. Sandra stood. "We have received inquiries from outside parties, including the media. Our legal team is handling the situation. While we value all residents, publicizing internal affairs harms us all." Alan turned to the crowd. "Does anyone else feel harmed by this? Harassed for asking to live in their own home? Speak up now, or things won't ever change." There was a long, silent pause. Then Lydia raised a shaking hand. "I do," she said, eyes on the floor. "They threatened me too." Another voice. "They fined me for a handrail." One more. "Refused to let me modify for my son's needs." The room changed. Residents looked at each other, not at the board, for the first time. Sandra's mask cracked. "This is dangerous. If we allow every deviation, the neighborhood deteriorates." Alan saw opportunity in her fear. "Or maybe it finally becomes a place people want to live." Carmichael called for order, but control slipped. Even voices that once stayed silent began to murmur. The board, cornered, adjourned suddenly. Meeting over, pending further review. No discussion. People didn't go home right away. They gathered outside, talking, uncertainty giving way to hope. Maybe for the first time, more were ready to resist. Alan met Lydia's gaze. "You did it," he whispered. She smiled, tired but bright. But as the crowd thinned, Alan saw Sandra lingering in the shadows, cell phone pressed to her ear, eyes never leaving him. The real battle, it seemed, was only just about to begin. Sunrise found Alan tired but unbowed. The fight had broken open. No going back. Emails flew overnight. The reporter Mercy sent a list of new questions, chasing every lead. The story was growing, branching like cracks through the board's once solid reputation. But the pressure was mounting. Alan woke to another notice taped to his door. Final opportunity to comply. Ramp removal required within 72 hours. The same boilerplate threat. This time, someone scrawled in ink at the bottom. "This is your last warning." He stared at the words, heart pounding. The message was unmistakable. Do this, or be destroyed. Alan called Lydia, voice thick with fatigue. "Did you get another letter?" A soft sigh. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm scared, Alan. I haven't slept," he reassured her, even as doubts gnawed at his confidence. It was one thing to fight for principle, another to watch fear eat away community bonds. Later that morning, Mercy's article went live online. Her headline was simple, blunt. HOA accused of violating disabled residents' rights, fines, threats, intimidation. Faces and names. Lydia, Tom, Carla accompanied the story. All at once, the struggle had a public face. Local news called for interviews. Alan fumbled through questions, nerves raw but conviction strong. Messages from outside Cypress Ridge flooded in. Some angry, some supportive, many offering advice and stories of similar battles. Out at the curb, a few residents, once silent, now galvanized, stood together, comparing letters, offering support. For the first time, Alan felt the beginnings of a real coalition. Still, all day Alan sensed eyes on him. The board's tactics had shifted. Less legal, more personal. He watched Sandra's silver Prius circle the block twice before noon, pausing each time near his ramp. When Tom dropped by, his voice shook with anger. "I heard the Bourne's lawyer's been asking around about your medical records. They're going for personal attacks now." Alan swallowed. Paranoia or reality? In war, sometimes the line blurred. He spent the afternoon photographing his ramp, scanning paperwork, preparing for every contingency. Lydia called again, late in the day. "I heard the board is meeting off-site tonight. No minutes, no records." "They're desperate," Alan replied. "That's when they make mistakes. We'll be ready." He paused, mind racing. "Keep every letter you get. Forward me everything." Cracks had formed in the board's power, but danger was everywhere. Retaliation, humiliation, even threats the police might get called. Alan stared at the setting sun, determination burning bright despite exhaustion. He wondered if the next escalation would come at night, while he slept, vulnerable, resolute, but alone. His phone buzzed, a private, untraceable number. He hesitated, then answered. "Check out Ethel," Abraham counted, illicit teasing. When Abraham buzzed, a low voice, muffled. "Back off. Last chance." The line went dead. Alan's hands trembled, not with fear but with fury. He looked outside as shadows lengthened, the world waiting and breathless. One thing was clear. There was no turning back. Tomorrow, the fight would have to go public in ways no one in Cypress Ridge had ever seen. Because tonight, Alan realized, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for every neighbor who had ever been made small. And that fight was about to get very, very real. Morning arrived, thick with tension, the kind that settles into your bones before you even leave the bed. Alan rolled into his kitchen to find text after text lighting up his phone. Mercy's headline was everywhere. Friends from across the state messaged, "Saw you on the news, stay safe." Even his cousin in Seattle emailed, "Didn't know you were a celebrity now." The phone rang hot. This time, not threats. Local disability advocates, legal aid organizations, even a city council member. The old feeling of isolation was gone, replaced by something thrilling, but risky. Attention on a scale Alan had never asked for. One email in particular stood out. "Alan, I'm an ATA attorney. Pro bono if you need representation. These folks can't override federal disability law for cosmetic reasons. Call me." Alan grinned for the first time in days. If the board wanted escalation, they'd just gotten it. In court. He dialed Tom, voice urgent. "Let's meet. Bring Carla and Lydia. We have options now." The four circled Alan's kitchen table, papers littered across its surface. Lydia's hands shook as she filled out complaint forms, but her eyes were brave. Carla, usually quiet, suggested gathering every complaint they could find. "If we file as a group, they'll have to pay attention." Alan outlined the legal plan. Formal HUD complaint, ADA lawsuit if needed, plus a letter to the city zoning office. Momentum took over. Even fear turned electric. A new lawyer, Jasmine Tran, joined by conference call. Her presence was a relief, calm, sharp, and fiercely organized. "You've documented everything. Good. Cease all communication with them except through counsel. Let them incriminate themselves." Jasmine explained the legal steps. A motion for injunctive relief to prevent removal or harassment while the case proceeded. She'd already contacted the state's Human Rights Office for backup. Suddenly the board's threats looked desperate, small compared to federal law. Tom's phone buzzed. A resident texted, "Board's going door to door demanding signatures for a recall vote against you all." Carla laughed. "Guess they're scared." Outside, a few neighbors gathered, wordless but watching the lawyer's car with interest. As the sun set, Alan penned one last email, this time to the entire board. "All communications, through attorney, legal action pending. Any further threats will be considered retaliation. He hit send and felt, for the first time, the heavy thrill of standing up and not being crushed. But at midnight, tapping echoed at Alan's window. 3 sharp knocks, then silence. He threw open the curtain. In the weak glow, a new note taped outside. If you think this is over, you're wrong. Alan stared at the message, heart slamming. The game had changed, but someone on the board was about to take it to a whole new level. In the days after that midnight warning, Cypress Ridge edged toward chaos. Board members were frantic, showing up at random houses, dragging out old grievances, issuing fresh fines at twice the old rate. But Alan and his fledgling coalition had become more than targets. They were the rally point for something bigger. Neighbors who'd once kept heads down now stopped Alan in the road, voices hushed but hopeful. "Thank you. Don't back down." Each kind word wrapped around Alan like a shield. Jasmine, the attorney, worked fast. Within a week, she lodged a formal ADA complaint and submitted a cease and desist. She even scheduled a press conference, the first ever in Cypress Ridge Homeowners Association history. That day, reporters flocked to the cul-de-sac. Alan hated the attention, but he welcomed the sunshine it dragged into the HOA's dark corners. Mercy filmed testimonies from Lydia, from Tom, from residents whose stories had stayed hidden for years. For the first time, bored local news anchors called the HOA embattled. As Alan wheeled up his Ram to meet Jasmine, neighbors trailed behind, some for moral support, others just out of curiosity. Even kids, who'd once steered bikes wide around him, gathered to listen. Jasmine laid out the facts, careful and sharp. They broke federal law. They retaliated. We want injunctive relief, damages, retraction of fines, and immediate rule amendments. Cameras clicked. Reporters scribbled. Lydia held Alan's hand, trembling but proud. The board's response, delivered later by courier, was a stunning escalation. You are hereby notified of intent to pursue civil action for defamation, harassment, and instigation of community discord. Alan read the words, heat flashing in his cheeks. Jasmine only smiled. Their threats are empty. Courts don't take kindly to this kind of counterattack. Meanwhile, City Hall took note. A council member scheduled a meeting with the HOA leadership. No longer a private club, but an organization under real scrutiny. In whispers and emails, Alan learned that more residents wanted change. There were calls for board elections, for rule revisions, for a community that actually meant the word. But even as the first victories stacked up, ugly rumors grew that Alan only cared for himself, that outsiders were ruining the neighborhood, that property values were at risk. The divide cut straight down the block. Late that night, Alan found a handwritten letter slipped under his door. If you keep this up, things will get worse. For everyone. His hands curled tight around the paper, not with fear, but with the solid promise that victory would come only when darkness and threats like this were dragged into daylight, once and for all. The next morning, city investigators parked in front of Sandra's house. Alan saw her face at the window, white with fury as officials began knocking on doors. Suddenly, winning felt almost possible. But at what cost? For Alan? For Cypress Ridge? For people who just wanted to call this strange, uneasy place home again. City officials spent 2 days moving through Cypress Ridge. They took notes, answered questions, and watched as neighbors, emboldened by exposure, began sharing more, even things that had nothing to do with ADA law. Embezzlement whispers, bizarre fines from years past, even missed safety inspections in common areas. The board's once invincible aura was crumbling. Sandra and Mr. Carmichael grew more defensive with every passing hour. Their allies no longer felt certain. More than a few discreetly approached Alan, asking about starting over. The next board meeting was standing room only. Reporters lined the back. Lydia, hand trembling, insisted on reading her written statement. I never wanted a fight, but I won't be bullied anymore. I want a board that remembers we're neighbors, not enemies. Applause followed. It was a beginning. The city attorney addressed the crowd in clipped tones. We're investigating multiple violations: ADA noncompliance, alleged retaliation, questionable fine issuance. If proven, individual board members could face removal, and the association will be required to revise its policies. Carmichael sputtered. You can't just come in, we've followed our rules. Alan countered gently. The rules need to serve the people who live here, not the other way around. For once, the crowd nodded along, open and unafraid. A vote was called on whether to retain the existing board pending investigation. The motion failed. Half the board was out, replaced by a slate of residents of every age and background. Lydia was elected as interim treasurer. Tom and Carla joined the new compliance committee. Even Alan, grinning wryly, was asked to head the accessibility reform team. As the old guard slunk out, Sandra passed by Alan, her eyes hollow with defeat. We did what we thought was right, she muttered. But Alan only shook his head, quietly. What's right doesn't hurt your neighbors. Outside, under sharp fall stars, a new sense of possibility hummed through Cypress Ridge. Yet, a quiet warning hovered on the cold air. Even with the worst actors gone, rules had deep roots, and not everyone would embrace change quickly. The promise was fragile, the future unsettled. And when Alan got home that night, a small note rested on his rim, unsigned. Not everyone here forgets. Watch yourself. Victory, it seemed, was never safe from a final shadow. Across Cypress Ridge, a cautious hope grew, but wounds lingered beneath the surface. The next days were a blur. Reform meetings, petition drives, morning coffees with nervous laughter, neighbors stepping cautiously into the light. Alan drafted new accessibility rules, grounded in ADA guidelines and basic decency. For the first time, input was invited from every corner of the community. Those who backed the old board stayed quiet, watching with narrowed eyes. One or two neighbors crossed the street instead of waving, but more dropped off cookies, casseroles, even tentative thank you cards. City officials guided policy changes. Jasmine worked with local advocacy groups, ensuring Cypress Ridge would set a new standard. Lydia started a neighborly newsletter, a true one, not a thinly veiled threat fest. Yet, as sunsets cooled into fall, rumors surfaced. Fines for minor things, leaves in yards, kids' chalk drawings, hadn't fully disappeared. Some board holdovers whispered that Alan and his friends were going too easy, letting standards slide. At a town hall, a retired man stood up. If we don't keep strict rules, this place will go downhill. Murmurs of agreement and pushback split the room. Alan replied quietly, A home only means something if you're free to live in it. The rules should protect us, not strangle us. Later, Alan's daughter visited, hugging him tight. I'm proud of you, she whispered. Her hand brushed the ramp symbol, the symbol of everything he'd fought for. Meanwhile, Mercy's follow-up story praised Cypress Ridge for facing its problems head-on, but reminded readers how close injustice had come to winning. Alan stopped by Lydia's, leaving her flowers. A few blocks away, Tom and his family played catch in their now rule-approved yard. As he rolled home, Alan's mind relaxed for the first time in months. But a flicker of fear remained. A strange car idling in the cul-de-sac, or a muttered remark at the mailbox. The struggle for belonging, Alan realized, never truly ended. Any victory, even a sweeping one, was just a breath between storms. And in that pause everyone waited. Would Cypress Ridge really change? Or would old ways, like old resentments, find their way back in? After all the meetings and votes and headlines faded, Cypress Ridge finally discovered a fragile balance. Neighbors, once strangers bound only by shared zip code and mutual suspicion, began to treat each other as people. Lydia's tomatoes grew fat, unbothered by rule-obsessed eyes. Tom's daughter Lucy rode her scooter down the main street, trailing bright chalk rainbows no one dared fine away. Even Carla's basketball hoop stayed up, a small monument to everyone who'd ever been threatened into silence. Alan, for his part, learned to rest again. He attended reform meetings, but also block parties and lazy Saturday breakfasts. Jasmine, the lawyer, became a friend. Mercy, the reporter, visited for coffee, keeping tabs on progress. But sometimes, fear still flickered at the edges. A snap of a twig on a quiet night. A blank envelope slipped through the door. The memory of being hunted lingered. One night, Alan woke from a dream of the ramp being ripped from his house. He sat at the window, watching moonlight spill across the metal, thankful and wide awake. He knew winning rights on paper wasn't the same as winning hearts. The rules might be fair now, but trust would take longer to grow. At the next HOA election, turnout was the highest in years. Some neighbors argued, some remembered wounds, but most wanted a future shaped by listening rather than fear. Alan was asked to speak. Looking at the tentative hope in the crowd, he simply said, "We fought hard for the right to call this place home. Let's be stubborn enough to keep it that way." As people applauded, a quiet new consensus emerged. Not closure, but a vow to keep watching each other's backs and to never hand power to bullies or shadows again. So Cypress Ridge didn't become perfect, but it became real. And Alan, with his ramp shining in the sun, finally felt like he belonged, not just in his own house, but in the uncertain, hopeful heartbeat of a neighborhood, forever changed. But deep in the night, as wind rattled the shutters, one question lingered, open as ever. In a place built on rules, how long would people remember that real safety comes not from fines, but from how you treat the ones who live beside you? If this story moved you, share it. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories, where justice, courage, and community collide. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment where the little guy stands tall. We'll see you in the next one.